In this presentation, we're going to take a look at balance sheet report settings. Let's zoom into it with Xero. Here we are in the Xero Demo Company dashboard. Let's go into the balance sheet and income statements. I'm going to open them both up once again. Go into the accounting dropdown. We're going to open up the old balance sheet as it opens up or when it opens up. I'm going to be right-clicking on the tab up top so that we can then duplicate that tab. Let's do the same for the P&L or the income statement. So back to the first tab, back to the accounting dropdown, down to the income statement. And then once that opens up on the income statement, doesn't seem like it's going. Here it goes. We'll right-click on that tab once again, and we'll duplicate that tab. Then we're going to go back over to the balance sheet, and we're going to consider some of our report settings. That's going to be up top. Now, before I do that, I'm going to hold down Control. I'm going to zoom in just a bit. So I'm at that, I like to be at that 125. I'm at the 125 and the zoom in. And then we have the adjustments up top. So if we were to adjust this report, we have a couple different things, and we'll do this in a few different presentations. So we have the report settings up top. We obviously have the information up here. We can go into the edit fields on some of the report items, such as the title. We have an edit field here that we can take a look at. We'll look at in a future presentation, and we can edit the layout down here. We also have the options for the save as and the export options. Our concentration at this point is going to be taking a look at this top field for the adjustments or the report settings. So within the report settings, we have the date. So we could select the drop down for the date and obviously choose some of the standard type of date items, which would be today, the current date, end of the last month, end of the last quarter, end of the last fiscal year, and the custom. And then we have our date option here where we can get our nice little, that's the update. That doesn't say date. Well, it does, but it's update. But then I have the little date thing here, which is going to give us the calendar. So we can go to the calendar and choose a date in that format as well. And so note, again, this is a balance sheet, so it's as of a specific point in time. So note that when I choose like the end of the last financial year, what does that do? Well, if I scroll down, why do I need as of the end of the year? I still kind of like having a range in for some reasons. Why? Because when I go in and drill down into this data, when I zoom into the data, then it needs a range to tell us how far back do you want me to take this information. We're as of this point in time, as of now. How far back do you want me to go to give you basically the GL for, in this case, the checking account? And it took it back to January because we basically had kind of like for the year ended. So the balance sheet, in other words, is as of a point in time. But when you go into these accounts to look at more detail, it's going to have a beginning and an ending time period. So now you see from January all the way through December. Now, if you don't want as much of that detail, we can change the range up top. So if I just wanted the December up top, if I just want it for the month of December, I can go up top and say, I'd like to go from December 1st, please, to the end of December, the 31st. We could run that report, and then we just have the information for December in here. Now, it would be nice if I go back to our balance sheet report that, the balance sheet, again, is as of a point in time. It doesn't really affect the balance sheet. But it would kind of be nice if we could run the report for a different range. And then when I zoom into the data down here, it would pick up that range. For example, if I was to change this date up top and I was to go to, I just want to have the end of the month, let's say, and update that report. Although the numbers don't change, it's still December 31st. It doesn't matter, end of the month, end of the year. It's still going to be the same numbers because it's a point in time. It'd be kind of nice that when I then use the drill down feature here, it would pick up just that range which I gave into the balance sheet, which would be just simply for a month. Notice we don't have that here. It's still picking up the entire year, even though I said like last month. So I'd still have to change. In other words, whenever you go into this report, you might have to change the range up top. And that's fine. Just be aware that you got to go up top and change that every time you go in here. Even if you change the range in the balance sheet report, it's probably the transaction details still going to show typically for the the time period, the full year possibly, or year to date. So then I'm going to go back up top. So that's the major settings that we can change in here. Then we have the more details we can go into in the report settings. So if we go into the report settings, we have the range again. We've already taken a look at that. We can compare with. So we can compare to the previous period. So for example, if I have end of the last month up top, and that's the end of December, and then I wanted to compare that to the previous period. Let's say I want to say the last period. I'm going to then update that report. And now we've got December 31st and November 31st, which is kind of nice. So we have that comparison going on with the December and November comparison. Again, this is as of the end of the end of the time period. So we have that. And if I went back into the report settings and I said I wanted, like, you know, the quarter, let's say 3 time periods, and I'm going to say update. Well, I got more than the quarter. I got 4 periods here. But in any case, we've got, obviously it'll be picking up the 3 previous time periods plus the current period, which would be 4 months. So 4 months of data as of the end of the time period for those 4 months. So that's going to be that option. If I go back then into the settings, I'm going to bring this back down to 0 and then update that again. And that'll bring us back down to the 1 column. So then I'm going to go back to the report settings. And then we have the accrual versus cash setting. So note that if I go to the cash setting and I go and I update this, then it's gonna use the data in the system to go back to cash. And notice what it did. It eliminated the accounts receivable and the accounts payable as part of the transaction. Because remember, those 2 accounts are basically accrual type of accounts. We don't have receivables or payables here. So also just note that if you're on a cash basis, some people like to run on a cash basis more. Some businesses run well on a cash basis, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just note that just because you put this little tag on cash or accrual doesn't really make you cash or accrual. In other words, even if you're running on a cash basis, and I would say, like, if you're doing bank feeds, for example, and you're completely dependent on the bank fees. Let's say you just have an Amazon, you know, you do affiliate marketing or you get paid online through Amazon or other affiliates, and it's a service company and you don't have any inventory, you're not tracking inventory, you're just completely reliant on bank feeds and you're just tracking the deposits as they come in directly from the bank. You're not invoicing, you're not using bills. Even on that system, you're in a complete cash basis system. Then you don't really have to check the cash basis because you're not using the accounts receivable or payable anyways, because you're not using bills or invoices, right? So I would still think that you pretty much want to be on the default of an accrual basis, even if you're using kind of a cash basis system. In other words, you know, these 2 things aren't going to be the determining factor as to when you're on a cash basis or accrual basis. It also depends, and possibly more so, on how you're going to input that data into the system. These 2 items are going to basically try to take what kind of forms are being put into the system and determine when they're going to be affecting the financial statements. So if you're on an accrual basis and you make an invoice on the cash side of things, that's when it's going to be recording the sales and it's going to be recording the income. But if you don't enter an invoice, even though you kind of should have or whatever in the process, then, you know, it's not going to be doing that, right? Because you didn't enter the invoice. And so if you're on an accrual system, it's going to wait till the cash is affected, which means you actually got the payment. And then it's going to be recording the financial statements when the payment is there. So in other words, just realize what these 2 things are kind of doing, and realize that the fact is that it's not a accrual or a cash just basically on those 2 checkpoints. Although once you realize what the differences are between these 2, it can be useful for you to kind of go back and forth and look at an accrual basis and then think about the cash basis, because the cash basis can give you an idea of the reports on kind of a cash flow basis, as opposed to an accrual basis. But I would recommend for most people, even if you have a cash basis system that you are using, to keep the default as the accrual on here and then just run the cash basis system, which means you might be totally reliant on bank feeds and not entering invoices and accounts payable, and you're pretty much going to be on a cash basis just by the way you input the data into the system. All right, so then we have numbers. We've got the show decimals or not. So if I was to uncheck this, obviously I can update this and we can take off the pennies, and that can clean things up a lot within the report. So, I mean, I always, you know, it's useful to me to make it as clean as possible. And if there's no added value in the decimals on the report, then I would often remove the decimals. So, and then we have the region. You can also sort by region if you so choose. So those are going to be our major options up top. I'm going to be closing this back out. Once you make the changes on this, if you make any changes that you want to save, you can also memorize this report. So we can save the report. We'll talk about how to save kind of a custom report after we make changes in a future presentation, and then we'll get into some of the other kind of adjustments we can make, including these items in the edit layout down here, and which you can go into with the edit item up top in future presentations.